everybody. The question that we're going to be talking about today is which populations are at increased risk for suicide?
That's a good question. So I would like to think of this along several vectors. One would be age, and statistics show that really elderly people and adolescents are at the highest risk of completing suicide compared to people who are middle-aged or still in their 20s and 30s, and even people who are perhaps in their 60s. So, of course, there are different reasons why the two extremes are at higher risk of committing suicide. When you're an adolescent, you're still figuring out your identity and your place in the world, and everything feels a lot more intense. So brain development is not yet complete, and you have less emotional resilience compared to someone who is older. I don't mean that in a shaming way. It's just how people grow up, right? I'm sure everyone has felt these moments of weakness and uncertainty, which felt very, very intense in their teenage years. That's part of growing up. So that is an age when there's a risk of higher risk of committing suicide, completing suicide. Then there are other vectors. For example, the economic one. People who are poor are far more likely to commit suicide than people who have financial stability. Now, this is for obvious reasons. When you are poor, life is a lot harder. And extreme poverty can often push people even into committing murder suicides. That is, they completing murder suicides. That is, they kill their family members first, and then they kill themselves. And that is something that explains why countries with lower per capita income have higher suicide rates. And besides the economic vector, there's the social aspect of things. So in India, for example, housewives complete suicide at much higher rates than their share of the population. But that should lead us to think about how we treat women in the country and what kind of agency they feel in their day-to-day lives. But the other angle to think of it is socially discriminated groups. They tend to have higher rates of suicide than groups that are not facing social discrimination. This is even true in America, where African Americans have a higher rate of suicide than the white population. So there's social, economic, age, even levels of education have a bearing on this. In general, people who are more highly educated have lower rates of suicide. But of course, these are only trends. These trends don't necessarily mean that someone who is in a demographic that you would think of as not prone to suicide is not incapable of completing suicide. Anybody could potentially succumb to these urges. So we should be kind to everyone that we see because we don't know what they're going through.
You covered a lot of important points. And although I did want to clarify something about the minority groups being at higher risk for suicide. In the US, actually the highest risk for suicide by ethnicity is faced by Native American population. So in the Native American population, from reading this graph right, it's around like 23 people per 100,000 compared to the average of around 14 per 100,000, average across the US, and the black population has a suicide rate around 8 out of every 100,000. So Native Americans are the minority that faces the most suicide risk in the US. And so just wanted to clarify that. And
I stand
I'll
corrected. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah, no problem. And additionally, another risk group for suicide is being male. Men experience suicide and complete suicide at a rate that's 4 times higher than women. And one of the causes that is being looked at to explain that difference is, harmful male stereotypes that prevent people from reaching out, seeking help, or talking about it, because talking about suicide is still seen as weakness, and that it's a personal thing that someone should be able to address and solve on their own. And that can that can hinder men's ability to talk about it with other people if they're still victimized to different toxic stereotypes. So that is also an at-risk population for completing suicide.
Yeah.
I also wanted to add transgender kids to this. So they have a much higher rate of suicide than cisgender kids.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Deepak and Ilakkiya, you guys covered pretty much, all the vectors and dimensions that go along with this question. So one thing that I wanted to mention was, I think a year or so back, I was just reading stories about people in, I think it was either Japan or China. I think, pretty sure it's Japan, where you have the elderly population, in their homes alone and not having anyone, and they either, complete suicide or have a natural death, and then there's no one to, no one to complete the ritual that takes place. So it's not entirely related to suicide, but the fact that they have to live alone, and even at their final moments they don't have anyone around them, like even after they pass away for 3 days, 4 days, they don't have anyone around them, and they're just there. And you have stories of these, and it's sort of disheartening and discouraging when you hear that. Obviously you may not be able to do anything to that person in Japan when you hear that story, but that gives you this sort of perspective that these things are happening. And the conversation that you have with the person next to you, the next day, can be a bit more open, and if that person wants to talk about it, you learn a bit more. So all these stories, you may not be able to make an impact right away, or immediately to that person who's going through that, but you can at least support the ones around you, and that's what we're trying to do here.
That's actually an excellent point. It speaks to the risk of excessive atomization of society that we've seen in postmodern times. Japan, I think, has a ministry of loneliness now to deal with this issue, and I think the UK also is coming up with something like that. So this is a real concern in our society, where we've become so capable of doing things separate from each other that we've lost communal life, right? So everything you do today involves interfacing with a screen as opposed to actually interacting with humans. Even day-to-day things that 10 years ago people would have had to go to a store to get and have had to talk to a cashier or someone. You can just order it online, and we've cut down human interaction so much today, and it's worth questioning whether that's a good thing or not.
It's a good price to pay or not. Yeah.
And since we are seeing fewer people, it's important to at least pay attention to them, and recognize if they are going through any struggles, and hopefully bring together people who you don't see too often as well. So we probably think about what are some things to look out for in the people around you, and respond to it if they seem to be on the path of considering suicide.
And go hug your grandparents.
Yes, do it. And
Good
parents too. Yeah.
Alrighty. We'll see you in the next video.
Oh, you're still here? Well, thanks for getting to the end of the video. Hey, while you're still here, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to get new updates when we post videos. Also, make sure to check out these equally exciting videos as well. Have you pressed it yet? Come on, you have 5 seconds left. 3, 2, press it now.